So, as most of you know who have been here for several months, we've been going through the book of Hebrews, and we took a kind of a detour into 2 Timothy and some other places last week to discuss the qualifications that we would have for an elder. Just because we're looking for elders right now, we want to make sure that they're all qualified when we nominate them. So, my part of Hebrews ended out being the last part of the first section of Hebrews chapter 12. So chapter 12, verses 12 through 13, and on down towards the end of the chapter. So if I can find my reading glasses here. I was planning initially on trying to get some slides together, and I didn't get a chance to do that yesterday afternoon, so I apologize for that. But I'm going to go ahead. Let's read together Hebrews chapter 12, starting in verse 12 and on through the end of the chapter. So, therefore, strengthen your listless hands and your weak knees, and make straight the paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be put out of joint, but be healed. Pursue peace with everyone in holiness, for without it no one will see the Lord. See to it that no one comes short of the grace of God, that no one is like a bitter root springing up and causing trouble, and through it many become defiled. And see to it that no one becomes an immoral or godless person like Esau, who sold his own birthright for a single meal. For you know that later, when he wanted to inherit the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no opportunity for repentance, although he sought the blessing with tears. For you have not come to something that can be touched, to a burning fire, and a darkness, and a gloom, and a whirlwind, and the blast of a trumpet, and the voice uttering words such that those who heard it begged to hear no more. For they could not bear what was commanded, even if an animal touches the mountain, it must be stoned. In fact, the scene was so terrifying that Moses said, I shudder with fear. But you've come to Mount Zion, the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to myriads of angels, to the assembly and the congregation of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous who have been made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks of something better than Abel's does. Take care not to refuse the one who is speaking. For if they did not escape when they refused the one who warned them on earth, how much less shall we if we reject the one who warns from heaven? Then his voice shook the earth, but now he has promised, I will once more shake not only the earth but heaven too. Now this phrase once more indicates the removal of what was shaken, that is, of created things, so that what is unshakable may remain. So we are receiving an unshakable kingdom. Let us give thanks, and through this let us offer worship pleasing to God in devotion and awe, for our God is indeed a devouring fire. So the first couple of verses here belong more to the previous thought or the previous paragraph than they do to kind of the rest of it. So we're talking, or above we were talking about enduring suffering as discipline. And we were talking about the way that our earthly fathers would discipline us, or at least we would hope that they would. Discipline with love, education, was, all the stuff that we were actually talking about this morning in Proverbs in Ray's class. And finally, when you get down to the end of it, we've got these last two verses, talking about strengthening things. So why would our listless hands and weak? Why would our hands be listless, I guess, and why would our knees be weak after all of that? So you think that maybe there are times that we receive discipline that might seem a little harsh on our end. You go in there and you see people, on the news who've been brought before a judge. They did something, made a mistake, And the next thing you know, or the next thing they know, they're in front of a judge, and they're going to be sent to, prison for an extended period of time, or have to pay a fine to the state, or pay recompense to the people that they hurt. And they look at that, and it seems almost to be too heavy a burden to bear. But the intent behind that, obviously, just as it was, when you were sent out by your grandma to pick a peach switch, is to have it driven into you that even though you may feel weak because of the discipline, that you're going to remember the discipline, and that ultimately that remembrance should strengthen your arms and your legs and your soul and your body. So the next section, in my version, it's entitled, Do Not Reject God's Warning. So earlier in Hebrews chapter 11, we had a long list of people, starting out with Abel, then going all the way through Samuel, who had been held up as examples of what faith and what endurance actually should be. Abel, for his sacrifice. Enoch was a man who God loved so much, he was one that didn't see death. Noah ended out enduring for 100 years, building an ark in the middle of a dry plain, enduring the mockery and the derision, I guess, of the people that were around him, until all of a sudden the floods came and the people who had been mocking him really wanted to be on the inside of that boat with him. Sarah and Abraham, who endured for 100 years for Abraham before he ended out having the child that they so desperately wanted. Sarah the same way. Isaac, Jacob, who was really the ancestor of the 12 tribes, the 12 children that he had. Moses, who led the nation of Israel out of bondage through innumerable hardships. Rahab, Gideon, Barak, Samson, who ended out failing one time, paid a price for it, but was willing to sacrifice his life to bring down the building on those who were against God and were against the nation of Israel. Then David, as we said this morning, a man after God's own heart. And then Samuel, who was kind of the counselor, I guess, to the king, at least in a lot of ways. So now we're going to take a look at kind of the other side. We're not going to have any direct examples of, actually we got one direct example that was in there, but it's more of a series of conditions. So I've got a friend that I work with. I've known him now. I've worked with him, probably 18 years. We've spent a lot of time, on the phone at work together. He started out living in Florida. He's in Kansas City now. And we spent time together both at work, away from work, anytime we're on travel. Wonderful guy, Christian. And we were talking about, as many of you in the congregation know, at this point in time, employment by any federal agency is something of a chancy thing. So he and I, working together for the VA, we were discussing, what alternate plans we could make in case something bad happened. And we were discussing retirement. I'm closer to it than he is by about a year. But I had asked him if he had bought back his military time yet. It's one of those things that goes into military or into civil service retirement. We don't really need to go into it here. Only the fact that if you pay back a certain amount of money to the government, you're allowed to add on any time you spent in the military to your civil service time for purposes of retirement. And I asked him if he'd done that yet, and he said, no, I haven't had a chance to, because the problem that I have right now is that I'd really like to, but I can't because of my wife. She apparently runs the checkbook, and he referred to as the CFO of the household. And she, anytime he gets a raise, anytime he gets a cost of living adjustment, anytime he gets a higher locality pay, she's already got plans for that money to be spent immediately before he has a chance to put it aside. In order to actually start putting money aside for his retirement, he ended up having to kind of sneak it into his thrift savings plan from his monthly pay. Anytime they would get a cost of living adjustment going up, he would, instead of taking that, he would just leave his pay at the same and just kick that money immediately over into the TSP savings account that we've all got. So it kind of comes down to, with this being Kansas, and we grow corn here, the way that like New York grows smog, or California grows surfers. So I'm assuming that most people here have heard the phrase eating your own seed corn, right? We know what eating our seed corn is. Is that a good thing or a bad thing, to eat your own seed corn? It's a bad idea, because the seed corn is literally the corn that's set aside for planting next year. And you can look at that seed corn and say, I'm really hungry now and that corn looks tasty. But if I eat it now, I'm not going to have anything to plant next spring. And then a year from now, if I think I'm hungry now, how hungry am I going to be when the time comes? So in 12:14, make sure that no one comes short of the grace of God, and that no one be like a bitter root springing up. So a bitter root, or wormwood, is described in Deuteronomy chapter 29, verses 16 through 21. And in 17 through 18, a root bearing poisonous or bitter fruit is someone who is turning away from the Lord our God to go and serve the gods of other nations. Deuteronomy 6:45 says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength." So is that does that sound bitter to anyone, to love the heart, or to love the Lord our God with all our heart, all our strength, and all our soul? And in 29:19, when a person hears the words of this sworn covenant, he blesses himself within his heart, saying, "I shall be safe, though I walk in the stubbornness of my heart." And in 29:20, finally, the Lord will not be willing to forgive him, but rather the anger of the Lord and his jealousy will smoke against that man, and the curses written in this book will settle upon him, and the Lord will blot his name out from heaven if he chooses to, what was that phrase today in Proverbs, to go away from the straight path, or to leave the straight path? If you're on the straight path, you're willing to show that level of endurance that God expects from you. That's exactly what he wants to see. He wants to see you showing your love to him by doing that, by staying on that straight path. But if you leave that path, he's not going to be willing to forgive those who leave the path, but rather the anger of the Lord and his jealousy are going to smoke against that man. And ultimately, if we leave that path ourselves, and this was also something, Ray, I probably should have just had you, I should have just gone up and, right at the beginning and said, yeah, what Ray said in the beginning, and just, we could have gotten out of here about 15 minutes early. But we discussed the fact that if we have friends, bad friends, that apostasy is contagious, or that bad friends can be contagious, even if you may be on that straight path for God, or aiming towards God, that you'll end out being drawn aside from that path by those bad friends. And that's mentioned, we're told not to associate with those that turn away in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verses 14 through 15. But we get to the point of the anecdote that I told a little earlier, now with Esau, who's called an immoral and godless person. Why would he be called an immoral and godless person? Because he wasn't capable of staying on that straight path. He was the kind of person that anytime he looked off the path, he saw a shiny thing and was not capable of waiting to get that shiny thing either through the way it should have or to recognize even maybe that shiny thing wasn't something that he should have had. Because the first of the two instances we really talk about that with him is when he comes back in from a hunt and in Genesis chapter 25, verses 27 through 34, we see this story where he comes in from a hunt and apparently he didn't catch anything, which happens to hunters sometimes. Well, I'm told that it happens to all hunters all the time, but if you ask them, it really never happens to them individually. So he comes in from the hunt, he's incredibly hungry, and he sees his brother has made some really tasty stew and wants some of that stew, says, "Brother, give me some of that stew." Brother says, "Well, give me your birthright." I'm so hungry, I'm going to die if I don't do this, so fine, you can have my birthright. And I'm going to assume that there are people in here today who have been hungry, and there's kind of like three stages of hungry. There's hungry, which is about probably where you are right now, thinking about what you're going to do once I, shut things down here, and which restaurant you're going to hit on the way home. I expect Tani and Paul will, hit the local Mexican place because that's what they do. Then there's really hungry. Really hungry is, I've been without food for a couple of 3 days now, either because I couldn't afford it or because it just wasn't available. But you're not going to die at that level of hunger. The rule of thumb I was taught in survival was you can go without food for 2 weeks, water without 2 days. So, a couple of days, you may think you're hungry, but, you're not really hungry yet. And then there's really, seriously, I'm going to die hungry. There was an experiment that was done back in World War II. A group of men who were pacifists, I believe they were actually either Quakers or Mennonites, who had said, we're pacifists, have been drafted, and, obviously we're not going to be willing to go fight. So they said, fine, your service now is going to be part of this experiment. And they knocked their caloric intake down to, I think it was 300 to 500 calories a day for something like 3 to 4 months. And it was mainly to get an idea for what it was going to be like after the war in Europe and in Japan, to see what the United States was going to have to do to reconstitute those two countries, how much food was going to be needed and how it was going to have to be allocated to bring those populations back from mass starvation. And these men were permanently mentally damaged by this experiment, to the point to where years later they said that they were picking up their plates and licking the crumbs off, even though for years at that point they'd been able to have full meals. The restrictions were no longer there. It still got inside them. That's hunger. Esau wasn't there. So he took the easy way out and lost his birthright first. And the second part of it was dealing with that. In Genesis chapter 3, you can take the easier sinful path once and think that you've come through it, but it changes you. It changed Esau. And Adam and Eve initially thought that the only change that they had endured after they ate of the forbidden fruit was that they just realized that they were naked. But it completely changed, their outlook on life for the rest of their lives, and changed humanity. So finally, we get down to Sinai versus Zion. So under the old covenant, Mount Sinai. What happened on Mount Sinai? Moses went up by himself to the top of a mountain that was completely surrounded by smoke and thunder and fire, and he made sure everyone knew on the way up that not only can you not touch this mountain, but if any of your livestock touches this mountain, any living creature that touches this mountain, probably down to the crickets, is going to have to be stoned. The voice of the Lord was painful. They heard it at the bottom of the mountain. And the scripture said, it was so painful they didn't want to hear it anymore. It hurt to hear. And, Mount Sinai at that point was sanctified to the presence of God, or the presence of God sanctified it. And the law was given there and was put into effect. But only Moses was directly allowed to be on top of that mountain to interact with God. But the Hebrew writer says that now we are with that new covenant. We are in the city of the living God, heavenly Jerusalem, where God is the judge, but Jesus is now the mediator of that new covenant. And the sprinkled blood that speaks of something better than Abel's, or Abel's blood cried out from the ground for vengeance, Jesus' blood cries out to God for forgiveness for us, to reconcile us back to Him. So as we go up that mountain now, it's for Mount Zion in Jerusalem. This isn't just Jesus being there. This isn't Moses being there. All of us are now welcome on that mountain because Jesus made it safe for us with His blood. So we need to take care not to refuse the one who is speaking, because if they did not escape when they refused the one who warned them on earth, how much less shall we if we reject the one who warns them from heaven? In Luke chapter 16, verses 19 through 31, there was the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. So, at one point, the rich man, after begging for Lazarus to be sent to dip his fingers in water and cool the tongue of the rich man, sorry, there's a big gulf back in, between here. I can't go there, or he can't go there, you can't come here. Well, please, at least send Lazarus back down to earth to tell my brothers and sisters so that they can avoid this place. And Moses said, well, if they've got the law and the prophets down there. Well, they're not going to listen to the law and prophets. Well, if they're not going to listen to the law and prophets, it's not going to do me any good to send Lazarus back. So if you refuse the one who is speaking, you're going to end out in a situation where ultimately there's not going to be anyone left to correct you, anyone left to discipline you. You've spurned it all, and there's only one thing left after all of that. So keep your eye on Jesus. We're on the mountaintop with Him right now. And as part of the invitation this morning, one of the things that I'd kind of like to talk about is there's something about being a Christian that gives you a wonderful sense of perspective. There are people in my life that I occasionally, will get a little irritated at, and I'll mutter under my breath. And, for me, one of the things I think the most is that when you look at the drivers in Manhattan, Kansas, Lord, love the lot of you, but please never go to Chicago. I don't think 40% of you would survive the experience. It's a blood sport there, I tell you. So, you look at some of the drivers in that roundabout over there at 3rd and Bluemont, but the drivers, the people that irritate you, the politicians, whoever it is that gets under your skin, and you think about that, and then I sit back and I think, how much worse must I have gotten under God's skin, before I'd accepted the fact that His Son died for me and I was baptized for Him, or through Him, and with Him. So, if you think that you might be getting under God's skin this morning, you may need to go ahead and come forward and be baptized. Wash that away. Wash away the irritation of the world, because from this point forward, you're going to look at that, and I'd hope that you look at it and say, I'm worse than these people are. So let's go ahead and come forward while we stand and sing the invitation song.